So today in our sermon, as I said, we're going to do a bit of an interview, and I have been cooking up juicy questions for Danica all week. And I'm going to start off with this one. So, Danica, can you tell us about the religious and spiritual roots of your upbringing?
Absolutely. So I grew up in a United Church in Calgary, attending fairly regularly with my mom and my sister, but with long breaks in the wintertime to go cross-country skiing in the Rockies. And speaking of Rocky, my early childhood experience at this United Church wasn't an exciting one for me. I remember complaining to my mom about how boring it was because all we ever did was cut out paper figures and glue them onto popsicle sticks. But fortunately, as I grew older, my experience became a lot more exciting to me. There was a whole cohort of youth who were the same age as me, and we got to put on plays and organize youth worship services and do the 30-hour famine, and we went hiking and climbing and slept overnight in the sanctuary, all sorts of things that were really exciting for young people, and that built a strong sense of community and an openness and curiosity for spiritual exploration. But more than just youth group, church was a place that was different for me. It was sacred. I think of church as one of the bubbles of progressivism in what was otherwise a really conservative upbringing. At school, my friends and their families were all very conservative in Calgary, and church was one of those places where I was encouraged to think about the world beyond my school and beyond my immediate community and imagine a world that was different, that was more just, where people were treated fairly. And in youth group, I was encouraged to think about how our world is constructed and think critically about the images and stories and language that I see in the media and also in our sacred texts to better understand and be able to deconstruct and reconstruct the world. And I guess another essential part of my upbringing was the time I spent at the Naramata Centre. So I attended from the time I was really young, and it quickly became an emotional and spiritual home for me. The programs were really engaging, and the staff were so cool, and but also so warm. And it was a place where I felt a profound feeling of belonging, and where I felt like I could bring my whole self and delve into the scary, murky questions of faith and who am I and identity. So if it was at youth group where I learned to look beyond my immediate world and imagine a place more just, it was at Naramata where I was given a really compelling example of how people might live better with each other.
Thanks. So following on that, I'm curious what grounds you on bad days or on days when you confront despair. Are there practices or places or readings that help bring you back to yourself?
Yeah, story, imagination. Well, as you can probably guess from the story and imagination, and also movement have been a big part of my spirituality. I was fortunate to have parents who saw that early in me and enrolled me in a creative dance troupe in Calgary called, it was formerly known as Children Dance. And if you don't know what creative dance is, or dance theater, it's interpretive dance, which may conjure up images of people bouncing around in leotards, which we were in leotards a lot of the time. But just as my peers were growing out of imagination play, I was devoting my entire weekends to working with youth my age and choreographers to adapt stories into dance theater. And so we would take stories, really beautiful imaginative stories like James and the Giant Peach and books from the Narnia series, and choreographers would give us pieces of those works and watch as movement emerged. And they would observe that movement and build it into larger pieces that then the public would come and pay to see. And we created entire worlds with just our bodies. peaches the size of houses bobbing in the ocean as sharks circled around, and James and all of his insect friends being saved at the last moment as seagulls swooped down and pulled them up. All of that we created with our bodies. It was really exciting stuff, and as a child it was truly magical. And the spiritual connection that I think is there that many of you may be able to relate to. Those of us who are performers or have an artistic practice of some sort might have this experience of flow or of working alongside other people in this golden and seamless way. Experiences like that, I think, profoundly shape the way that we relate to ourselves and that we relate to others. Of moving around a stage and telling a story with other people, I was deeply aware of my own body, but also my presence within the whole. And as lots of us do, I conspired to bring myself back over and over again into that place of connection. I really yearned for that feeling of togetherness, of collectively imagining a world and for it to become real. And I was given that tool really early on to connect imagination, this imagining a world, to reality. And I fall back on that whenever I confront despair. I think despair for me often comes from this disconnect between my world of ideals, the way that I want this to see the world working, and what is actually happening here. There's a mismatch. And this movement practices like yoga and breathing that bring me back into my body, allow me to reawaken that hope in these worlds that we have yet to create.
Thank you. I'm also curious to ask, work with children and youth sometimes gets siloed in congregations and in the church. I know from hearing you talk that you have experienced what it can be like to have young people really meaningfully integrated into worship life, and certainly we strive for that here. So I'm curious to hear from you what it looks like and feels like to have that happen, and what difference it makes for everyone at all ages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that the dance theater group that I was a part of, that's a really great model for how youth can be engaged and how the creativity of youth can be engaged in really compelling ways. But in terms of a faith community, I first experienced that kind of integration of all ages when working at the Naramata Centre. I didn't realize at the time how unique of an experience it is to be worshiping in a community with all ages. And I'm still trying to work out exactly why it works so well at the Naramata Centre, but I'm just going to speak to what I figured out so far. I think a big part of it is that Naramata had its roots as a training center for lay ministers, and many of its directors over the years were all educators, and so they approached their work, the programs that they created, the communities that they built, and the worship experiences around it with an educational lens. So knowing that people learn in all sorts of ways. And so worship, for example, always involved many modes of understanding. So movement was a big part of it. Visuals were a big part of it. Tangible pieces were a big part of it. Kinesthetic, tactile sort of pieces were always a part of it. Stories were illustrated. Our bodies were used in prayer. Liturgy was explained so it was easy to understand. All of these, I think, are great for children, and they're also equally great for all people. We all have different ways of engaging story and engaging prayer. So I could tell you a lot more of the nuts and bolts about how their liturgy involved all ages, but I think it's much bigger than that. The Naramata Centre's vision to train leaders permeated the whole organization. It was a big part of their mandate, and one that led them to put young people in positions of power and decision making. And for organizations, that can be quite scary. It takes a huge investment in young people to put them into positions of growth, where they're not quite there yet, but with some assistance and encouragement, they can grow into that position. And so it takes investment, but it's also risky because young people are ready to be transformed. They're always in the process of transformation, as many of us adults are as well. But youth, that's acute, and they expect the world to change with them and to change quickly. And an organization that doesn't respond to that becomes quickly boring, and youth will leave. And so organizations that want to keep their young people need to be nimble and reflective of the interests of the youth. And so it's risky to bring young people into decision making. And Naramata has had directors, very wise directors over the years, and I don't know who the wise director was that invited all the young people in, but bless them, they're wise and courageous, and I think it was a really brilliant decision, because the creativity and vibrancy of those young people transformed the organization over and over again and permeated it. And so as a young person going, I was able to see myself reflected in my leaders, and the leaders were able to see themselves reflected in their supervisors. And there was a kind of connection that happened and a trusting community that was built that invited transformation. And so children wanted to come back every year, and they came and they left transformed as they went out into the world. And for young people like me who took on their leadership roles, it left me transformed as well. It was an intensely affirming experience to be seen for my gifts and to be given the challenge of rising up into them. And so while many of my peers who I was on summer staff with, a lot of them haven't stayed in ministry, but I know for many of them, their experience at the Naramata Centre has rippled through their lives. Because when young people are involved in decision making, it encourages us not to just become active members within our organization, but just in our wider community to feel ownership over our lives in the world.
So many young people leave the church. When there are so many worthy things for you to be devoting your time to, what keeps you in the church?
So in thinking about this, I think about the times that I have stepped away from the church when it didn't feel like there was anything left for me here. And every time that I've come back, it's because someone has looked at me and called me back by name. I've been very fortunate to have youth leaders and community members and mentors, especially at the Naramata Centre, who took the time to see me for my own gifts. So you can probably relate to when someone says, like, Chris, I've noticed you have such a welcoming presence. How would you feel about coming up on the stage? I know you've never done it before, but how would you feel about coming up on stage and saying our welcome in worship? I think you'd be great for it. You'll do great. It feels wonderful to have that said to you. And I had that affirmed to me so many times and always pushed to be on my edge of discomfort, to hear, I've seen this in you, so to see myself in, like someone seeing me clearly, and then saying, you can be more, you can do it, believing in me. And always pushing me to be on my edge, to be on that edge of discomfort. And I think that's what keeps me coming back, is feeling honored and then also pushed, that there's always more for you here.
So speaking of growing edges and transformation, we, as we know, are a congregation delving into the process of becoming an affirming congregation. I'm curious what it's meant for you and for your family to be part of a denomination wrestling to be welcoming and inclusive for queer folks.
Well, I've been fortunate to have grown up in a denomination that's already fairly inclusive, or at least they say that they're inclusive. And so being a young person, questioning my sexuality and eventually coming out as queer, it's always been, I can't even describe what it would have been like to have not had that, because that was always a big part of knowing who I was, because my church family taught me that I am sacred. And I know just from my friends and the people I date in the queer community that a lot of them don't have that experience of knowing that they are sacred. But a little bit more tangibly, it's for my family, it's been such a blessing to be part of a church. I remember being 13 years old and my mom just in passing saying that she didn't think that gay people should be married. And she's fine with people being gay, but just doesn't think that the marriage institution is the right place for that to be happening. And that was a hard thing as a 13-year-old who was like pretty sure I wasn't straight to hear. And over the years, as many of my friends came out and I came out to my parents, there were many tough conversations that we had to have over and over again that just felt like they weren't getting anywhere. When I was emotionally charged, I was not in a place to be understanding and to be doing that work with my parents. And it felt unfair that I had to be doing that work with my parents because I wouldn't have had to do that if I was straight. And but my mom was part of a faith community this whole time. Her church is a big part in her life, and the church was going through this journey of discovering how to be inclusive alongside her. So at church, she was able to sit with her peers and go to workshops and muddle through all of it with me getting to step aside and not be any part of it. And so my mom was able to have her confusion acknowledged and supported without me having to do that emotional work. And so my mom's church is currently a little bit ahead of us in the affirming process. And it's been such a relief to not have to do that work with my mom. And instead of having to nag her about using proper pronouns or about offering just subtle judgments about the ways people live their lives, we can instead focus on rebuilding our relationship. And I can show up and show up with all my pieces and as my true self in a way that I hadn't ever been with her before.
Thank you. So here's my last question. Sermons are about preaching the good news of the gospel. Sometimes when I'm thinking about writing a sermon and reflecting on a particular scripture, I think about if I were standing in front of a crowd of thousands, what's the central thing that I would want to tell them or remind them? What is the core good news of that gospel message? So, no pressure. But what is it for you?
Well, my time at Naramata and in church communities, so in spiritual community broadly, has revealed to me time and time again that together we have enough. When we live in healthy and inclusive community and we give generously what we can, we have enough. But we only have enough together. We need each other. And we need our straight folk as allies, and we need our queers to lead the way and broaden our perception of gender and all these constructions that bind us. We need each other, and we need our young people too.
Amen. Let's sing.